Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Leah.
And I'm Mike.
And we are going to look at our All English unit today, our News Digest section. And we've got a pretty hefty topic that we're going to be looking at. It's not a light story about parachutes or butterflies or unicorns. It's something a little bit more serious here.
Absolutely. When we say hefty, we can mean physically large, right? Like an elephant is a hefty animal, but it has this idea of being heavy. And sometimes we use the word heavy to say serious, probably kind of sad, not kind of a light, fun article. It might be even a little bit upsetting to some people to read some of the things in this article that we will be learning today. But it is news from the world we live in. It is sort of a investigation, or at least a little window into how different cultures around the world make decisions and the things that they consider to be okay or desirable in society can often be completely unattractive and undesirable and even wrong to other parts of the world. So it's one of those things that we're constantly dealing with. And I guess as the world is more connected these days, some of these differences get more noticeable, right? Since we're all trading with each other and hearing news from all around the world as it happens, sometimes stories like this pop up and it just kind of makes you scratch your head and worry about things. But with news, good or bad, you shouldn't just bury your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. We have to deal with the reality of these things, and in that way, and only in that way, can we often understand them and then hopefully improve them in the future.
And one of the difficulties with this all is that when we're talking about, marriage age, it's in a move forward in a society where life is, moving into the next generation, into the future. You think we're going to protect the life of a young girl or a young boy to make sure they're not out and working all day, to make sure they're not getting married at ridiculously young ages. That's kind of the forward momentum of the world, is towards better. But this one feels like it's going to cause some debate, and it's actually sparking outrage. As our title says, Iraqi bill to lower marriage age sparks outrage. It's not something that, you're sitting around and going, gee, this is going to be a fun thing to talk about. Why don't we listen to the whole article one time right now?
Recently, the Iraqi parliament's preliminary approval of a controversial proposal to drastically lower the legal marriage age for girls from 18 to 9 has sparked widespread concern. This move has drawn strong reactions both domestically and internationally, as many worry it will exacerbate child marriage issues and severely infringe upon women's rights. At the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1994, Iraq explicitly prohibited the legalization of child marriage. Currently, the legal marriage age for both men and women is 18, although women can marry at 15 with a guardian's consent. The newly proposed amendment to the Personal Status Law not only significantly lowers the legal marriage age for women, but also allows citizens to choose between religious authorities or civil courts when settling family matters. Notably, according to UNICEF data, 28% of Iraqi women marry before the age of 18, and this percentage could rise further if the amendment passes. Supporters of the amendment argue that it aims to standardize Islamic law and protect young girls from immoral relationships. Their opponents, including human rights organizations, women's groups, and social activists, have voiced strong objections. They warn that if it is passed, the amendment will severely worsen child marriage issues, intensify the exploitation of women and children, and potentially undo decades of progress in women's rights and gender equality in Iraq. A researcher from Human Rights Watch said, "Girls belong on the playground and in school, not in a wedding dress." The amendment could deprive countless girls of their futures and well-being. The proposal and its preliminary approval have sparked widespread social debate and international attention. Although the final fate of the bill remains uncertain, this event serves as a stark reminder that protecting women's rights and child welfare is a long-term and challenging global task.
All right, for those of you who don't know what Iraqi stands for, it means of Iraq. Iraq, of course, being over there in the Middle East. Around it is Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey. It is The capital is Baghdad, if you've heard of that. You might have heard of Saddam Hussein before, who was a leader there for a while. But in Iraq, so an Iraqi bill is being written or created to try to lower the marriage age. And this particular bill is sparking outrage. So if you think about a fire sparking, you see those little sparks coming off the fire. That is going to create a fire. Here, what is being sparked is outrage, absolute and total anger and fury about the idea of lowering the marriage age.
Yeah, a bill is kind of like a baby law. So we often think of a bill as something that's proposed in a government. And then, of course, they will debate it. The different parties will, talk about it and find ways to criticize it or to improve it. And then once they pass the law, once the Lifa Yuan or Congress or Parliament or whatever it is agrees on basically the rule, whatever this will be, the law, then they will pass it. So a bill will get voted on, and once it gets approved, it becomes a law. So this hasn't quite reached the legal books, as we said. But as Leah mentioned, this is something they're considering doing. Certain politicians want to do this. And yes, it's causing outrage, probably both in Iraq, I'm sure, and around the world.
Yeah.
Shock and horror. People are upset about it. They're shocked by it, too. Outrage will often cause shock and surprise, and not in a good way. You'd have to be a pretty hard-hearted person to be outraged if your friends throw you a surprise party for your birthday. But if you find out that your boss has been stealing money from your paycheck, yeah, that would be outrage. You're angry and you're shocked because this is a bad thing that you suddenly discovered. So let's find out what is going on here as we get into the article.
Okay, so it starts out with recently, so in recent months or in recent years, the Iraqi parliament's preliminary approval of a controversial proposal to drastically lower the legal marriage age for girls from 18 to 9, just half that age, has sparked widespread concern. So there's
the
lot of
outrage
information.
there.
Yeah.
There's the outrage. 18 to 9
years old. Oh,
yeah.
my goodness.
You can see how that would get people shocked and worried.
And as you mentioned earlier, the parliament is the lawmaking body a lot of times for a country. Sometimes it will have more than one party, bicameral, being two bodies, right? As we have in America, we have the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they have one slightly higher than the other. The House of Lords and House of Commons, I believe, would be a comparison in England. And here, the Iraqi parliament's preliminary, so preliminary means initial, before everything's gotten really kind of put in stone, they're going to maybe make an initial decision about what they want to do. This is their preliminary decision. Their preliminary approval is what they've gotten. Somebody has said, yes, we can initially say, yes, we are willing to do this thing. What thing? Well, they're willing to do this controversial proposal. A lot of times when we talk about something that's controversial, it's something that's going to cause dispute. It's going to cause an argument. People might hold controversial attitudes. A lot of topics out there are very controversial. For example, if you go over to a friend's house for dinner and you're sitting down and enjoying your evening, there are certain topics that you're probably going to steer away from so that you don't start a controversial conversation or a controversial debate. A lot of times religion will be one of those. Politics will definitely cause controversy. People talking about people's finances. In American culture, we don't really say, so how much do you make at your job? That's kind of considered a bit taboo. Personal life, what people choose to do every day in their personal life can be a controversial topic, or how you choose to raise your children. All of these can be quite controversial topics, which means you're likely to start a back and forth argument about what your beliefs are and another person's beliefs if they are different. And here we've got this controversial proposal, something that's being brought to the parliament with an initial, yes, let's do it. This controversial proposal wants to do one thing. It wants to drastically lower the legal marriage age for girls from 18 to 9. Okay, something is being drastically changed. It's being changed in a very large way. For example, if you get told by the doctor that you are going to die if you don't drastically change your diet, then you will probably drastically lose quite a bit of weight once you do change your diet. It is not always a negative thing. You can drastically shorten your life by smoking lots of cigarettes or drinking lots of alcohol, it is said. But you can also drastically improve your life by maybe moving into a new area of town or winning the lottery, which would probably drastically improve my life. Here it's a negative thing. You're going to drastically lower this legal marriage age for girls from 18 to 9, and it has sparked widespread concern. People all around are very, very worried about it.
Absolutely. I mean, that is, as you said, a 50% cut. 18, I mean, if they change it from 18 to 17,
right,
that wouldn't be a drastic change. That would be a slight or minor change. But yes, to drastically change it from 18 years old, I think a lot of Western countries, many countries in the world, the marriage age is, the legal marriage age is usually 18. I think in some places it's still 16. Mm-hmm. But, most people would say that, yes, the kids should be teenagers. They should have a little bit of maturity and education. In some places, they should be the same age they would be if they, join the army or drive a car or, go to jail or vote or things like that. An adult, in other words. 18 years old, but 9, I think a lot of us would still consider those are children. If you're
Absolutely.
9 years old, and the idea of children getting married and having their own babies theoretically within a couple of years, this does spark or cause widespread concern. A lot of people, both in Iraq and around the world, and certainly people who deal with children's rights and women's rights and things like that, in the United Nations and whatnot, they would also be paying a lot of attention to this. It says this move, this controversial proposal, has drawn strong reactions both domestically and internationally. Well, that's a good description of what controversial means. It will draw strong reactions both for and against. All right. So saying, chocolate is tasty is not really controversial, right?
No.
Most people would have no problem with agreeing that chocolate is tasty, but if you said chocolate is the best thing to put on a cheeseburger, a lot of people go, whoa, wait a minute. But then there's other people who might, well, peanut butter's good. I agree. And it's not a serious topic, but it's one of those things where some people would be like, oh, yeah, I totally agree. And lots of other people would say, I totally disagree. And it will cause argument and debate and strong feelings both for and against on either side. In this case, it's being controversial both domestically, that means inside Iraq, of course, with, parents and girls and women and all sorts of people, and internationally, as I mentioned, with, women's rights groups, child protection groups, charities, the United Nations. Why? Well, it says many people, or as many will worry, it will exacerbate child marriage issues and severely infringe upon women's rights. These are obviously the people who are against this proposal. They say it will make child marriage issues worse. To exacerbate something is to make something worse. If you have an itchy spot on your skin and you keep scratching at it, that will exacerbate the problem, right? It will become more painful. It might spread. It will get worse. If you have two friends are fighting and then you get involved and start lying about them to each other, that will just make their fight worse. It will exacerbate or degrade the problem, make the problem worse in some kind of way. So they think it will make child marriage issues in that country. I assume they already have some. It will make those issues worse. More girls and younger girls will now be getting forced into marriage. And it will also severely infringe upon women's rights. To infringe on something is kind of step on someone's rights, to kind of go over the line. If I'm infringing on you, I might be telling you what to do or pushing you around a bit. I might be bullying you a bit. I might be taking legal liberties that I'm not allowed to take. So if someone walks right up to you and gets right in your face and starts poking their finger on your nose, they have infringed on your personal space. And you could definitely, ask the police to stop them doing that, because you're kind of crossing that line. You're starting to get into my rights and you're starting to take away my freedoms.
And that's exactly what's going on here and needs to ideally be protected. And that's something that has historically been protected with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. So at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1994, Iraq explicitly prohibited the legalization of child marriage. So there was this gathering within the United Nations, a group of experts held a convention, wrote down some rules and amendments, and it's not maybe a full legal bill or anything, but it's something that a consensus that different nations are agreeing to. And things that this might cover would be a human rights treaty with civil, political, economic, social, health, and cultural rights for children, keeping children out of the military, preventing the sale of children, and over 150 nations abide by this convention. And at that convention, Iraq said, oh, yeah, we're not going to allow children to get married. So they explicitly, very, very clearly, with no question mark being there at the end of their sentences, prohibited, disallowed, said absolutely not possible for this to happen, the legalization of child marriage. They are not going to allow child marriage to become legal. No way. Currently, right now, the legal marriage age for both men and women is 18, although women can marry at 15 with a guardian's consent. So a consent means an approval. They allow it. They have to normally sign something or stand in front of a judge and say, I am giving my consent. I am allowing this. Your opposite of your consent would be your dissent. So you would not allow that certain thing. A lot of times your guardians are going to give that consent. That would be your parents or an adult that takes care of you. And you might need a consent for something very simple like going to on the school field trip or something like that. Your parents might have to send in a consent form where they agree to let you go. Or they might give a consent form if there's a movie that's being shown in school that really might be a little bit mature for children to watch. So you might have to have your parents sign a consent form saying, yes, it's okay if my child watches this movie. And that's what's going on here, is that historically, at least in the past couple of decades, the marriage age was 18. With a consent from a parent or guardian, it was 15.
Very, very interesting. And I think that's in a line with a lot more of the Western countries, right? This is, of course, back in 1994 when Saddam Hussein was still in charge in Iraq. And it was more of a Western sort of, not focused country, but certainly a lot of their laws, a lot of their regulations, their government was a bit more in line with some of the Western countries. Now, of course, Saddam has gotten rid of in that 2003 war that America started under George Bush, and now the country is controlled more by religious parties. So that probably has something to do with some of these new laws that they've brought in, a lot more similar to what you would see in neighboring countries like Iran or Afghanistan. The newly proposed amendment to the personal status law, that's the name of the law that they sort of regulate marriage age in Iraq with. So this newly proposed amendment being a legal change or change to a contract. So if they write the contract and then you are supposed to sign it, but you find something in there that you don't quite agree with, and both sides agree to change it, then that change is an amendment, all right? So it's just a little adjustment or a small change. So this proposed change or amendment to the personal status law not only significantly lowers the legal marriage age for women from 18 to 9, as we saw, but also allows citizens to choose between religious authorities or civil courts when settling family matters. Okay, so this is something, again, where they're trying to get a bit more religious law into, the legal system in the country than they previously had. So I suppose that when you're talking about family matters that need to be settled, you're talking about divorce, you're talking about who gets the kids if the couple breaks up, if the husband and wife go through a divorce. And of course, in most countries, you have civil courts, courts that run along the lines of the law, not along lines of a religion. But in Iraq and in some other countries, you can choose. You can choose between religious authorities or a religious court. I believe that would be Sharia law under Islam, or civil courts, which would be the sort of non-religious courts, the types of courts we are used to here. I don't think there's like a Buddhist court in Taiwan that you can go to. If you're a Confucian court, it's the same law for everyone. Your religion doesn't enter into it. But in Iraq, I guess, if you do want to get married or get divorced, you can choose between both a religious or a civil court. And I would assume that the religious court would probably be a bit more conservative and maybe lean a bit more to the rights of the man as opposed to the woman.
We go on. It says, notably, according to UNICEF data, 28% of Iraqi women marry before the age of 18, and this percentage could rise further if the amendment passes. Notably just means it's worth noting, something that is worth noting. So something to pay attention to is that according to UNICEF data, UNICEF being the UN International Children's Emergency Fund, a group that gathers together funds and food and donations for children around the world, clothes for children around the world who are living in poverty and need support. And the data from UNICEF, that's just one bit of what it does, says that 28% of Iraqi women are getting married below the age of 18. So that means for every 100 Iraqi women, 28 of them or more are getting married around younger than 18. And this percentage here, we're talking about that 28%. So percentage means, percent of 100. If you have 10% would be 10 of 100, right? If you're taking that number, trying to give some good general senses of percentage here. If you take your pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving and you cut it into 8 slices, then each piece will have a percentage of the pie. 4 pieces will equal 50% of the pie, and 2 pieces will equal 25% of the pie. So it's like a portion of what is being, of a whole, I guess is a way to describe it. Mike, do you have any opinions on percentages?
Well, I'd say I'm 50% for them and 50% against them. So I guess that would be no, I don't really have. But I am 100% for taking a break right now. So let's do that. All right, we are back, and we're checking out our article about Iraqi bill that seeks to lower the marriage age and how this bill, this proposed law in Iraq, is sparking controversy. Let's look at some of the reasons for and against this bill. Probably the reasons against you would sort of be able to guess a little more.
Yeah.
So let's look at the reasons for. It says supporters of the amendment, so people who do want to change the law and allow girls as young as 9 to get married, people who think this is a good idea or supporters of the amendment argue, this is what they say, their opinion, that it aims to standardize Islamic law and protect young girls from immoral relationships. Okay, that's kind of 2 reasons there. To standardize Islamic law, I'm guessing here what they basically mean is that if you read the Quran, if you read some of the ancient Islamic holy books, in there, they have religious laws, written long ago, thousands of years ago, that say, girls should be married, can be married at the age of 9. And that obviously would be different from the old law, which said girls can only marry at 18. So they want to kind of put those in alignment. They want to sort of line them up and not have them sort of be opposite each other. And they also want to protect young girls from immoral relationships. This is more of the parents' argument that, girls who are young might get involved with boys who just want to take them to bed, but the boys don't want to marry them. We'll have, young pregnant girls. I guess they might be looking at, 14-year-old girls just casually dating and kissing boys like in Western countries and in other places. They look at that as immoral. That's kind of wrong on a very sort of fundamental basis. It goes against the teaching of religion. It goes against the teaching of the church or whatever. It might not be illegal, but it is immoral. And that's an important distinction here. Illegal means against the law. Immoral just means against what we consider to be good and right. So that's the idea here. Now, the opponents, well, they have reasons you can probably predict.
Yeah, that is including human rights organizations, women's group, and social activists. Those are the opponents. They have voiced strong objections. So human rights organization groups that look out for people's rights to live safely, to live ideally freely, to live with shelter, food, and clothing. That might be some things that a human rights organization is aware of.
And also groups like UNICEF that you mentioned earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Women's groups, of course, taking care of women's rights, looking for women and girls, the care of, the social well-being of, and social activists. An activist is somebody who supports very strongly protests. So you might have a social activist, you might have a human rights activist, you might have a political activist. That person feels very strongly about what the topic is that's being discussed. So here, if we're talking about the marriage age getting younger, then they would feel very strongly against it, and they go out and they would say, no, we protest this. They might even get out and go into the community and raise awareness of this problem and try to get, people to sign a different kind of protest or something like that to say, hey, no, let's not do this. And they have voiced strong objections. To object means to say no. I am strongly saying no. I object. I say I absolutely don't want this thing. And here they are strongly objecting. They warn that if it is passed, the amendment will severely worsen child marriage issues, intensify the exploitation of women and children, and potentially undo decades of progress in women's rights and gender equality in Iraq. All I can say is, yeah, it probably will, because if a 9-year-old can get married, there's a lot of room for bad things to happen, because a 9-year-old can't really say, I don't want this very well, and have people listen to her. And it is specifically her in this because it's mainly talking about lowering the age for females to be married. So intensify the exploitation here is talking about the use and abuse of something. Here, if you intensify the use and abuse of women and children, it's not for the good thing. Exploitation is very seldom for a good thing. In a lot of cases, it's to use people for free labor or cheap labor or for sexual purposes. You can have sexual exploitation. You really don't particularly like to see this word when it comes out at you. And also the decades of progress, absolutely going to be affected by this law should it come into effect.
Yes, absolutely. It would definitely be a setback for girls and women in Iraq. A researcher from Human Rights Watch said, this is someone obviously who objects to this new law, they said girls belong on the playground and in school, not in a wedding dress. That's very simply but well stated. So girls, meaning, young women like this, certainly under the age of 18, down around 9 years old, that kind of age, where should people like that be? Girls like that and boys like that should be on the playground playing like kids do, and in school learning like kids should. Of course, in certain countries, girls even getting an education can be controversial. You might have seen on the news that Afghanistan has recently closed all schools for girls. So they don't want girls to be educated. They basically want girls to marry young, have babies, stay home, cook, clean, serve their husband, and that's about it. And they should not be in a wedding dress, says this researcher. They should not be getting married at the age of 9. They should be learning and playing as kids do. The amendment could deprive countless girls of their futures and well-being. Yes, if they make this law, it will be taking away the futures and the well-being of many girls. That is what it is to deprive. You're taking away something that is necessary or something that should be there for people. If you deprive someone of food or something, you're starving that person. If you deprive your pet of affection and care, then you're abusing that pet, right? So when we deprive things of what is required, that's often a form of abuse. I mean, you can deprive yourself of food if you're on a diet, and that might be a good thing. But if you're punishing people by depriving them, then you're probably abusing them or abusing your position in some kind of way. And we don't want to take the futures, the well-being, the possible dreams of girls just to turn them at 9 or 10 into young mothers and brides.
And as a wrap-up we go, the proposal and its preliminary approval have sparked widespread social debate and international attention, as we have already said through the article. Although the final fate of the bill remains uncertain, although we don't know what's going to happen yet, this event serves as a stark reminder that protecting women's rights and child welfare is a long-term and challenging global task. Much like the Roe versus Wade situation going on in America, it's a stark reminder that if you don't allow certain protections for women's rights, then you're going to really face consequences like women not making it through childbirth or passing away when they have a miscarriage because no one's willing to take care of them. Here it's looking at taking away the basic rights of a woman to decide whether they're of an age to get married at an age when they're old enough to do so, closer to 18, as opposed to a child at the age of 9.
Absolutely, and that's a really good point. It's a long-term task as well. I mean, a lot of these things that we've been seeing, both with Roe versus Wade, with the, women no longer having control over their bodies like in America, or this child marriage thing. These are things that we thought were settled decades ago.
Decades.
Right? Women should have these rights and girls should not be forced to marry. And they did have laws, but things can roll back, right? History can kind of go backwards. It doesn't mean that every time we have some good new change, it's going to be there forever. We have to fight to protect these things because there are some people who want to only go back to the olden days.
I think that is not where I want to go.
No, it's not where I want to live, or if I had a daughter, nor she. No.
So hopefully that's not going to happen here in Taiwan or in most places in the rest of the world or in Iraq in the end as it'll all come about. For English Digest, I'm Leah.
I'm Mike.
Take care.
Bye-bye.